everyone. My name is John Trankle. I'm currently a graduate student at Fontbonne University's Instructional Design and Technology program. I am also an educator. I'm teaching second grade in the School District of Clayton. I've been there for a couple years now. I've also taught in the Fort Zumwalt School District and the Ladue School District. I'm also an Air Force veteran, so this is a second career for me, but I absolutely love teaching, and I also have a passion for technology, and so that is what I will be focusing on today. All right, so let's go ahead and get started today. I wanted to start by asking you a question. Have you ever wondered, why is it that some teachers can reach their learners better than others? The so-called art of teaching. Why is it that some educators can show year after year, no matter what resources they have at their disposal, their students will continue to show growth? Well, I'm hoping that after hearing today's presentation, you'll see that it's not just because they're necessarily better teachers. They understand what few others do in terms of technology and how it can give feedback and, in fact, enhance learning for everyone in the classroom. They have become experts on not what to teach, not how to teach it necessarily, but how to show that their students have learned it. Don't worry if you haven't thought about this. My goal here is to show you that you've probably already been doing some of these things that these educators are doing, but maybe we'll go over some modern ways to integrate some resources to continue to do what they do so well. Here's what I found. So what do we mean when we say technology? If this is your idea of modern technology, you are in the right place. Going through school, I was used to the dreaded blue books where we had to take paper tests and jotting to show performance and to show that I'd learned something. And real test-taking anxiety can take effect on the students that way. This is just one mode of assessing how students are performing in the classroom. I want to show you today that not only should you be incorporating more modes of assessment, but there are technologies out there that can show that your students actually have untapped abilities that can be brought out with these technologies as well. So if you're feeling the need to ditch the pen and the paper, or even just to have your students show a performance task in front of you, there are lots of other ways that we're going to go over today that you might be able to give them the ability to show and demonstrate that in the mode that's most comfortable for them. That's going to show their abilities in the best and most comfortable way possible. That's when you're going to get the best out of your students, and that's where they'll show you how they've learned, and that way you can assess and show others what they've learned. All right, so real quick, to recap, technology is going to be any piece of device or any invention that makes life easier, not more complicated, that increases our quality of life and doesn't separate us. It should be any technology in the classroom especially should be seen as an equalizer, something that's going to help us understand or something that's going to help the students understand better. So let's go ahead and jump into some of the technologies that we'll be exploring today. Specifically, technology in the classroom doesn't always come at the same pace as the rest of life. It needs to be properly vetted. We need to see, is it something that's going to help us understand the students better, or is it something that's going to help the students understand what we're teaching better? Now, in the past, you may have some examples in your mind moving from the traditional pen and paper, or even all the way back in the day, chalk and whiteboards, or chalkboards. Smart devices these days, obviously the first thing that comes to mind when we think of technology in the classroom. iPads, smart devices, any augmented technology that allows our students to access more content or access it in a way that speaks to them in a more personalized manner, we have usually implemented in the classroom. However, not too long ago, these technologies were seen as groundbreaking, of course, but they weren't always welcome. Can you believe it? Graphing calculators at one time were even seen as inappropriate for the classroom, something that would allow students to shortchange the curriculum, the learning experience, so to speak, and they wouldn't learn as much. Can you imagine trying to talk to those educators from the past about the smart devices we have these days? It just goes to show that technology itself should be vetted, but it also should be seen with fresh eyes. We can't always use the same ways that we did in the past to assess whether something should be used in the classroom. Smart devices are a good example of bringing various technologies into one device. Graphing calculators, laser discs, DVDs, VHSs, Blu-rays, streaming technologies these days, even traditional tape and foreign language how-tos are just some examples of what have been used in the classroom before that are truly outdated now only because they've been modernized, brought into single devices, and integrated into a teacher's toolbox. Now, knowing how to use these technologies is, of course, a must. Proficiency comes over time. And again, that art of teaching. How do some teachers use these technologies or technologies that are not as developed as these to continue to help students and to help themselves show what their students have learned? That's what we want to go over today. Now, for some of our viewers who maybe don't find themselves directly in front of students all the time, you can still acknowledge that there's a growing trend in technology in the field of education. We want to make it smarter. We want to make it faster, more connected, more available. This concept is known as the Internet of Things, in which all of our modern devices can be connected to the internet, monitored, and personalized for our learning and, again, for our creature comforts, increasing that quality of life. And of course, we want to make it smaller, more portable, and less obvious. So for the classroom, we want to do all of that as well, but we need to make it as cheap as possible. Not in quality, but of course, on large-scale implementation, you have to be concerned about technologies. That's why technology in the classroom tends to come a little bit slower than the rest of the world. Now, there are some current trends, and some of those you'll see today that we'll go over on how to better use technology in the classroom for assessments. In particular, cloud suites, your Google Suites, your Google Classroom, all of these have sort of become commonplace, especially in the last couple of years with our current pandemic. So the learning management systems that we're going to use today are Seesaw, and we will of course still touch on Google Classroom and the Google Suite, Microsoft Suite as well. We'll get an honorable mention, and we also have for our upper grades, our secondary education and higher learning, we have our Canvas modules, or our Canvas learning management systems as well. But of course, we'll always be using examples that you can take back to your own learning environment and see, is this something that is going to increase our quality of living? Is this something that's going to make my life easier? Or is it going to complicate things? Some technologies are not one size fits all. What works in one learning environment may not be appropriate or may not yet be appropriate in another. You, of course, need to tailor these and personalize them for your learners and yourself as well. There are, of course, always privacy ramifications and the usefulness of the technology itself to consider, like we just discussed. These things you'll definitely want to check out with your administrators or your monitors in your own learning environment. Okay? Some management systems and some technologies are a little bit more invasive than others, and some are much more privacy-based. So vet those as well properly with your technology teachers, with your human resources moderators, whoever basically does your legal work and the legal side of things, checking in on technologies. This is one of those elements that technology is bringing to our foreground because it's coming into our classrooms and we're bringing more eyes. And when we are connected to that internet, we do potentially make ourselves available to the rest of the internet. We do want to have those safeguards in place. So again, proper vetting should always take priority over new and innovative just for the sake of new and innovative. All right, let's take a look at some of those management systems and go ahead and get started with how can you use this in your own learning environment. Let's take it back to the top. Think again about those educators or instructors who, no matter what you give them, seem to become an expert on a piece of technology in just a matter of weeks. Well, again, it's not necessarily that they spend all of their free time researching and exploring technologies. If you wanted to, you could find no less than thousands of new technologies in a single weekend that you could implement the next week in your own learning environment. Throughout this discussion, I want to remind you that sometimes the philosophy of less is more applies to using technology in the classroom. During my studies here at Fontbonne, I have run into hundreds of technologies that could potentially be used for the classroom. I again have to vet those properly and ask myself, is this something that applies to my learners? Sometimes good ideas and good teaching are just that, but they just don't apply to your particular group of learners. I've learned during my time here to always get to know your learners before you decide that a technology is right for them. That's how you'll know what area, what mode of expression will be best for assessing them, and then you can try to find a technology that fits for that. So I vetted a few today that I want to go over, and one in particular that I think really gives you that freedom and your learners that freedom to really show and use any mode of expression that they want. Now, of course, again, there are thousands out there that you could have used. But if we want to truly spend some time with the technology and see the ins and outs of how it works and how it can be implemented, we really can't hop from technology to technology. That's what our professional learning networks are for. Those individuals around the globe, around the world, that we can check in from time to time and maybe even share with, in which we know if I need a good idea, I can go here. Okay? But let's not find and grab as many ideas as we can. Let's pick out a few as we get to know our learners and what it is we're trying to help them learn. Also asking ourselves, how can I show that they've learned it? All right, let's go ahead and jump into one of my favorites in particular, again, that I think will hopefully inspire you to spend some time with it as well. This is the learning management system known as Seesaw. Now, again, I said that I'm teaching primarily the primary grades. That's kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. That's where I spend most of my time. And so one of the problems that we ran into is no matter what learners we had at this age developmentally, most of them are not ready for higher technologies such as laptops. So we tend to use smart devices such as iPads, or sometimes even simpler than that. That's appropriate for my learners. Some of your learners may be ready for some more advanced learning management systems, such as the Google Suite. That's your Google Forms, your Google Sheets, your Google Word Processing, Google Docs. And some of them might even be ready for more advanced learning management systems such as Microsoft Suite or Microsoft Office. That's what I grew up using, and I do have a proficiency there as well, but I also know it well enough to know that's not really appropriate for my learners. They're going to run into more technological hiccups along the way, and that the learning curve for learning the technology will take precedence over the actual content that I'm trying to teach them. As well as Canvas. My wife is also a teacher. She uses Canvas for her high school students. That works for them. So let's go ahead and jump into that Seesaw and how you can use this to integrate other technologies as well. One of the beauties of this technology is that you can integrate things like blogging and podcasting and website and collaboration and coordination with some of your other peers. You have that sort of real-time feedback that we'll go into that is so essential in integrating a piece of technology. That's that piece that can actually increase your quality of life by freeing up some of your instructional time, or planning time, I should say, so that you can spend more time using that data, the formative assessment side of things, to help your learners. So real quick, before we jump into that, let's look at the three main types of assessments that pretty much any educator around the world will keep in mind when they're trying to assess how well do their students know content and how well do they know their students. All right, first up, you have probably the most important and most overlooked assessment when you first start teaching somebody anything, and that is the pre-assessment. Now, the name might be a bit deceiving. You do want to assess your students, and this doesn't always mean just giving them the content right away and seeing how they do. Pre-assessments can include a variety of things such as skill assessment, learner assessment, in which you get to know how does your learner learn best. Okay? Do you have folks who are musically inclined? Do you have someone who has a unique skill or potential that you're not aware of that they might actually be able to use and teach others? Do you have more athletic students who like to get up and move around, kinesthetic learners that is, who enjoy body movement and whose minds operate at more efficiency when they're in motion? Or you have students who absolutely must share what it is they're learning so that they can better understand it and teach it to others too. All these different learner styles or learner types, and there are a variety of philosophies out there that sort of give name to these, but these learner types are what you want to try to find out in a pre-assessment. Now, pre-assessments, again, can be designated towards what do my students know how to do, what is it that they know, and then how is it that they learn best. So really two main pillars of what are my learners learning, and then how do they learn best should be determined in a pre-assessment. This happens before instruction, and it should be planned out during the planning phase of your own curriculum or your own instruction. All right, that's number one. Number two is the formative assessment. So after pre-assessment, you know what your learners know. You spend some time with going through that information and knowing, I don't think I had this idea plan where we're going to take everyone outside, but I seem to have a lot of learners who really like to spend more time up here and talking with each other than they do with their bodies in motion. So you might need to change some things around after you get results from your pre-assessment. After that comes the actual instruction itself. So after going through a proper learner analysis where you get to know your learners in this pre-assessment, okay, you've designed content in such a way now that you think will connect with them best, you're now going to actually deliver the instruction. Now this obviously looks very different from learning environment to learning environment. I can't teach the same thing in the same way that I do in my primary grades as I might with my high school students. So now that we're actually in the midst of instruction, here's where you're going to continue to do what we call formative assessments. So after your pre-assessment comes your formative assessment during instruction. This is the bread and butter of any strong educator. So during formative assessments, you're continually recording, you're continually assessing what it is your learners are learning. How well are they learning it? What is it that you want them to learn? You're constantly revisiting that idea in your head of what is it I want my learners to know, and how will they show it? How well will I grade it? How will I let them know what I'm looking for? Our rubrics and our scoring guides is, of course, what I'm referring to. These things are essential in any lesson. Now, if this is starting to seem a little overwhelming, you're thinking, okay, all I want to do is figure out, can my students do 4 times 4? Or can my students show that they know what a title tells about a story? Do I really need to be doing all of these things? And the answer is no. Pre-assessments, again, are often overlooked because as you get to know your learners, here's where we start to integrate that art of teaching. You start to change your assessments after a formative assessment, or you start to change your instruction after a formative assessment because you're getting to know your learners. You're integrating the pre-assessment data on the fly. Now, of course, you have all that pre-recorded and you can constantly refer back to it. I myself like to keep a binder or a Google spreadsheet in which I know all the different anecdotes and all the things that I learn about my learners along the way. And that all compiles into, hopefully, the next step. Okay, keeping that all in mind, you've now reached the last stage of assessment called summative assessment. These are our tests, our performance tasks, our demonstrations, our collaborative presentations. These are those areas where technology can help us expand our modes of expression for assessment, to give your students or give your learners greater choice and modes of expression to demonstrate proficiency with what it is you're trying to have them learn. So if you've reached this stage, that's great. You've done your pre-assessments, you've done your formative assessments during instruction, and then you've changed things as needed to suit your learners' needs and learning styles. You're now at the end stage of instruction where either your time has elapsed or you know that your students or your learners are ready to demonstrate the proficiency. So what do you do? Well, let's show how we can use some technologies that are out there inside of our learning management system that we're going to be looking at today. Again, it's going to be Seesaw, to use all these assessment pillars to deliver instruction. All right, let's jump into Seesaw, which is our technology learning management system where we're going to house and hub all of our learning. And again, a learning management system should do some of those functions that are necessary for the educator or the instructor, right? You want to be able to have all your data in one place. It should be easy and accessible for you, your learners, and all other stakeholders involved. So again, privacy, ramifications, FERPA, these are all things you want to consider when looking for a good LMS. All right, so if you're like me, you might start by getting to know your learners, of course, doing the learners' needs assessments and analysis, but also it usually boils down to, especially in the classroom, what is it that we are teaching? Where are we in our instruction? And what is it that our learner needs to know or demonstrate that they have learned? So for me, I have grabbed some examples from a classroom here, my own classroom. These are the things that I would have to keep in mind during the lesson design, instructional design itself. This is sort of aside from the technology piece. I need my students to be able to say that they can, or I can, compose well-developed writing texts for specific audiences and for specific purposes. The purpose that we will be diving into a little bit further on that is narrative writing. And of course, during any writing, apply a writing process to develop a text for audience and purpose, and then gather, analyze, evaluate, and use information from a variety of sources. Not even close to learner-friendly language, but that's why you, the instructor, will present it in a way that's a little bit more palpable to your learners. Now, I in particular am grabbing the source information as I am, again, a teacher in the Clayton School District from the Missouri Learning Standards on the Department of Education and Secondary Education. That's where we get all of our initial standards from, and that's probably where you are grabbing some of yours as well if you're also a teacher in Missouri. So that's where I have grabbed these priority standards and catered the specific ones for, in this case, a second grade lesson. All right, so within Seesaw, I have another video, if you haven't already checked it out, on my website or my blog that shows you how to get yourself set up, how to get your classroom set up on Seesaw, but they have also lots of amazing instructional videos on their own site as well. So if you haven't seen those already, maybe pause the video now, come on back after this, after that, and coming back to, all right, now how do I actually use that to assess my learners in the classroom? So if you're like me, a lot of our classrooms are actually the digital classrooms this past year. Like I said, I am back in the classroom, but I still find myself using this a lot. So I thought that we would start from scratch here real quick, creating a lesson on Seesaw that shows how you can create assessments, not just learning activities, but actual assessments on Seesaw itself too. So like any other activity on Seesaw, once you've got yourself set up and you're in your class, you would create an activity or any assessment activity by tapping on your add button here. And it says assign activity. Again, for any of you veteran educators or instructors, you know that any activity can be turned into assessment when designed properly. So they, of course, have their own libraries. We have our own community set up at our school, but for this purpose, we'll be creating our own. All right, and this will be our formative assessment. Since this is not the end game here, we're going to integrate another technology piece to deliver the instruction. This will be a formative assessment, narrative writing. Give yourself a good title. Grade 2. It always helps too for learners at home if you put the date on there as well. So in this case, we are 3, 2, 1, 2, 21, 21. And of course, for all of your learner at home students, it helps sometimes to actually put the date on there as well when it is either due or when it was posted. So this is where you can start to use technology to your advantage in the classroom here. So this is where it can be really open-ended. So I can develop, or in this case for my learners, I might say plan, create, and make a writing story all about my life. Taking again that standard, that overall, what do I want my students to be able to show in the end, and putting it in a way that speaks to my learners more. So I can plan, create for this, and then of course, and I can share and show how to do this. And that's where we really leave it open-ended. So this is where that art of teaching is going to come in handy again. Is not just having the technology, not just using the bare bones of it, but using what you would already use in the classroom to assimilate this technology now to give your learners the ability to really show their proficiency in whatever way speaks to them best. So this we can kind of leave open-ended. That's the only instructions I'm going to leave there. Now, of course, to keep in compliance with your ADA and all your other students who might need these as well, you can do exactly what I just did by adding the voice instructions. So do that real quick here. All right, give yourself permission for some of these. Click the button to begin when recording, and that's exactly what we'll do for this particular assessment. For this assessment, I want you to plan, create, and make a writing story all about your life and share and show how to do this with your fellow students. Oop. Or fellow students. So again, that sharing and publishing piece also being, again, part of our priority standards there, the writing process. So always, again, sneaking those things in there and making it relevant to your learners. Now, you can also do a video example. I could, instead of putting just the audio instructions there, I could actually have a video of myself doing that, reading those instructions out loud, showing what it looks like. I could also do dual videos here. So lots of options on Seesaw on how to best do that. Let's start simple, though. As you get more proficient with the technology, you can experiment a little bit more. Now, if you'd like, and this is one of the beauties of Seesaw, is that you can add a template for your students. So we'll do that now. And again, look at these options, these modes of expressions. Your students can do a video of them, perhaps showing that they've created a story about their life. So in a very traditional, real, culturally responsive way, they can just share their story by sharing a story. Now, of course, if you'd like to request, if it's a writing standard like you are with me, or like I'm doing here, if you want to assess a writing standard, this might be more of the planning out phase that you want to have a draft for them. They could also then record a video of them reading it, or they could record just themselves storytelling, and you could just ask for a photo of their writing as well. So again, not necessarily replacing or substituting out, but assimilating and integrating technology into some of the great teaching strategies and activities you're already doing.
If you are maybe in the upper grades or you're middle school or high school or higher learners, you can maybe integrate some of those other learning suites we've talked about as well, Microsoft and Google and even Kansas. If they have files, lots of acceptable formats here as well. If the students are working and collaborating with other students, this is another tool they might use here. Or if you just want to have them directly do this activity onto Seesaw itself, they have a keyboard, maybe they're doing this on a touch device, whatever works best for you. Really, just these modes of expressions are fantastic. If you are getting your students into podcasting or video blogging or blogging themselves as well, creating a link to their blog to show that they've demonstrated that, like, that might be their way that they share. Just fantastic ways. So for this, we're going to do a drawing and we're going to leave it open-ended for our students. So some of the features here, again, if you've seen my introduction video, we're just going to change a few quick things to make it a little bit more palpable to the eye. And we can, again, sort of reassess that. Ooh, that's standard. I can share my story. If you want, you can. Maybe we'll go back and we'll make this sort of word for word here. So copy and paste here. Add our template. A template is where your students will respond. So we're going to keep it kind of open-ended. And here's another beauty too of sort of as making your life easier. You can sort of craft the piece and the instructions to your own liking. Again, knowing your students. Again, you can have audio instructions if you like, but you've sort of already given those at the top here. All right, and this is where maybe we will make it a little more open-ended for our learners. All right. All right, now, of course, we want to make this very specific so our learners don't have a lot of questions here. That's not our goal. Our goal is that our students can do these things once they understand the instructions well enough and we've delivered the instructions. This is just sort of that along the way. Here is an example of one of my stories. Now, again, this could be a picture of their writing. It could be them reading the writing. It could be them delivering a performance piece. It could be them a collaborative work that they worked on with another student. I have gotten all kinds of examples, and I find that when I leave it a little bit more open-ended on to demonstrate the story, I get a lot more quality responses than just take a picture of your writing here or do a read aloud of your writing here. So again, one of the things that we're working on right now in my classroom is getting our students set up on video blogging or podcasting, and I am getting some great examples there along the way by keeping the mode of expression a little bit more open-ended. All right, so once you have a general idea of what your students will do or where on Seesaw they will submit it, it's time for you now to assign that activity to your class. Okay, so there's some of my fellow teams there. They don't mind. I've already gotten permission from them. So we'll just assign it to our class here. And this is that sort of learning management part of the system coming into class. We can assign it now. We could schedule it for later. So let's pretend we wanted to schedule this for tomorrow. And I know I have that class at 8 o'clock. If for whatever reason I wanted to assign it to my learners at home too, I could do that as well. And the activity is ready to go. Now, once my students actually start submitting, I can find that activity. So if we, for example, were to assign that activity now to my class, all right, go back to my class, and I can see that the management piece of my system here, I've got where my students can add some of their own pieces where they're working on activities where I've assigned them, messages between the students and the families, and then some of the skills that they have. So again, this is just sort of bare bones. Let's get you started on Seesaw using this to assess students in your class in a non-traditional sense. It is a fantastic way to get yourself started on integrating technologies. So that is a good start there. Now, if you are like me and you don't like to just sort of do the same thing over and over and over again, because you know it's not speaking to your learners, and you've realized, you know what, my learners actually need a little bit more think time. They need to pause a little bit more. That's where I've grabbed a technology piece today called Edpuzzle. And again, I've got my actual instruction will not be coming from me. This would be something that I would integrate onto our actual activities here. So if along the way you realize, you know what, I'm going to do this activity. So instead of this being our instructions, it'll be after participating in the mini lesson. Complete the activity by submitting your response on this activity. And this, again, this for me, this will be the assessment piece. So I have that link there. That'll be my actual instruction. Okay, and now I've got the lesson embedded within my management system. I've used an outside technology. And you can see, again, one of the great parts about Edpuzzle, if you haven't explored that, is that um, you can sort of do the lesson and not necessarily recycle lessons, but cater them to your own students. So I know my own students need a little more time to stop and think. They don't like just to be passive learners. They like to get engaged. They like to try out their learning. They love that sort of fail and repeat, learn something, fail and repeat. They love that being able to do trial and error comfortably. And so it sort of asks questions along the way that it'll actually pause instruction, which would be me, and then you answer here, and then instruction actually begins. All right, and so after going through how to write a narrative piece, what that looks like, sounds like, again, come back to which of the following these are a good sort of stop and break point. Great instructional strategy, and when you're using technology, is to see how it's actually being applied. If it's working or not. Again, this is all real-time feedback that gets sent to my class. So not only do I see how well my students did during the lesson, but I now can use my assessment piece on Seesaw to see, okay, did they retain it? Where do I need to take it next? If I get some students who don't have submissions, what's going on there? All kinds of areas for me to work with that data in a nice, comfortable, easy place. So this is one of the ways that you can use technologies to do your formative assessments. And of course, this could also be my summative along the way. You can see at the beginning of my Edpuzzle here, I actually embedded our pre-assessment at the beginning here. So I want to know sort of what do my learners know about how to write. A big part of narrative writing is how well do you remember things? And so I want to get to not only know how well are my learners going to be able to self-start this activity, who is going to need help, who's ready to just jump and start writing those things. At this point, I would have liked to have already gone over the writing process and how to plan things, but embedding your pre-assessments and some of the other technologies that you're going to use, housing it all in one spot like a learning management system is a great way to use technology in your classroom for your assessments, being pre, formative, and if you'd like, summative as well.
All right, so there you have it. There's a great way to integrate a learning management system into your class to help you save some of those times or parts of the job that can take up the most amount of time. Having all of your assessment information in one place is absolutely essential in today's modern climate, especially with so much remote learning taking place. I myself have made my way back into the classroom, but I know several of you out there might still find yourself in a remote learning situation. And I know it can be difficult. And like I said before, you may feel yourself drowning in digital paperwork versus actual paperwork in the classroom. I would encourage you to go back and watch how and explore more of how technologies maybe can sort of be not just swapped out for what we might do in the classroom, but how they can actually change the way that you look at what your students are capable of and how they can show you what they're capable of. Now, having a working knowledge of these technologies is a fantastic start to integrating technology into your classroom assessments. It's just a start, though. To become one of those teachers who just seems to get it and can use any technology that they have at their disposal takes time and practice. Knowing your learners is, of course, the most important thing. Taking time to continually check in with them. That's that art of teaching. But of course, increasing the tools in your mental toolbox and your instructional tools will definitely not hurt. And I hope I've given you some of those today. And of course, a big thank you to the Fontbonne University Instructional Design program. Our instructors and my fellow graduates for helping me along the way. This is something that we love to learn about and share with each other, but we also love the opportunity to get to share it with you. And hopefully one day you'll take some of this information and one day you'll be showing us and instructing us how to do things best and sharing some of those and adding those technologies to our own toolboxes too. So thank you again for watching. If you have any questions, again, you can reach me on Twitter at @Trankle. And you guys have a wonderful day.